So welcome, Andy. You are a professor of political science from the USA, currently teaching and living in Bologna, Italy. How did you experience yesterday events?
I received a flurry of texts on my cell phone saying, "Turn on the news. Look what's happening." And then I turned on the news and watched it, just with a lot of attention for a number of hours.
Many comments from politicians and journalists refer to the storm of the Capitol Hill, which is metaphorically seen as the temple of democracy, as an insurrection or an attempted coup. How would you assess yesterday's events?
I would say it's an insurrection, it's sedition, and not a coup. A coup would have to be more planned. It would have to be, seizing critical infrastructure. This was sort of this was frankly President Trump stirring up a mob and telling them to go march to the Capitol and take it over. And that's exactly what happened. This is sedition, an insurrection, in sort of a textbook case.
Mm. And historically seen, how would you judge that?
Historically, it's interesting. There have been a number of incidents at the Capitol throughout the history, shootings, people coming in, protests. In 1954, there was a Puerto Rican insurrection where Puerto Rican nationalists took over the House and they shot 7 people and one floor. They had Puerto Rican flags. But there's never been a case of a contested election where the person in dispute tells his supporters to go march on the Capitol and take it over. That's what's worrying, right? And it actually was a little bit comical. It was unorganized. It had no aim. I think it was sort of a mob, sort of emotional outlet. It shouldn't have happened. The Capitol Police should have been able to keep them at bay. And there was a disruption, and 7 hours later, the Senate was back in session. And the House was back in session. So unfortunately, no long-term consequences.
Yeah. It's obvious that President Trump fomented the violent actions, not only with his speech yesterday, but for the storm of the Capitol, but also in the months before. How can Trump hold accountable for this?
Sure. And I think, first of all, I think he will be held to account for it, because this was a direct attack on the American democracy and sort of the temple of American democracy. Every congressman and senator feels this personally, right? That, and there's a direct line of correlation from Trump stirring up sedition and creating the situation. I think there's a number of venues. There's talk about Article 25 of the US Constitution, which basically says a president is unfit for office, but that's a little tricky because it's more about health. It was originally, if the president had a stroke and was unable to carry out his duties. I think impeachment is a real possibility. And yes, he's only in office for 2 more weeks, but there's nothing holding back the House and the Senate from drawing up articles of impeachment, having a Senate trial. The Senate can determine the rules itself. The Senate can even have a trial after Donald Trump has left office, because impeachment has 2 consequences: removal from office and exclusion from future public offices. And that to me would be a really strong signal. So I think impeachment would be the way to go rather than the 25th Amendment.
And how would you see and describe the mood, political mood in the US in the moment?
I think the mood is shocked, terrified, embarrassed. And I think the politicians on Capitol Hill, for the most part, are very upset. And they're upset at Trump. And any sort of leniency, any sort of like the president should be given a pass for what he's done, the idea that he's going to leave office soon and let's just forget about him, I think that's over. I think there's going to be a number of elements going after Trump personally, going after him while he's president. So I don't think he's going to be able to run away from the consequences of this.
After the decisive elections in Georgia, it's now clear that the Republicans also lost their majority in the Senate. Right. And in the meantime, several leading politicians of the grand old party took a strong stance against Trump. How would you describe the state of the Republicans, and what are the perspectives of this party?
I think the Republican Party has a lot to do to rebuild itself, rebuild its brand, rebuild its ideals. It's clear they sold their soul to the devil. And yes, I'm speaking harshly against Trump because what he did yesterday is tantamount to being sort of a quasi-dictator or wanting to be a dictator and overthrow democratic processes in America. And this is something that is above and beyond normal parameters. I think there's going to be a long period of reflection and strife within the Republican Party. It can rebuild itself. It just has to find a new consensus. And in a way, I think what happened yesterday shows the danger of following a populist leader, right? Clear cut. And that will actually help the Republican Party to moderate itself and find a new path, rather than be tempted to continue to follow Trump after office or have elements of the Trumpism really have influence on the Republican Party.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew, very much for this clear statement.
Thank you so much.
And have a good day. Thanks a lot.
You too. Thank you so much, Christoph. It's a pleasure.